Hey, welcome to episode 16 of Track Records, where we talk all things music with your hosts, Kenny and Barry. And Barry, if you want to take it from here.
So when we ended last week, we were just going through some of the recent records that I had picked up and chatting about the artists, chatting about the records, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we left off with this record here, Nico, the Marble Index, and I was singing the praises of this record specifically, but Nico in general.
And
Um,
I had not heard that album like since I was a kid, basically, because it was in my brother's record collection. So I gave it a spin, or a stream, I should say, after our last chat. And to say the least, it's an acquired taste.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. I think her music would probably scare the shit out of most people, you
Yeah,
know.
and I mean, you can see her music and her look and everything was a reaction to what happened before, even before she joined the Velvet Underground, when she was a fashion model and all, that she didn't want to be blonde, she didn't want to be beautiful, she didn't want to sing, pop songs, so it's okay, let me dye my hair dark, let me, play the harmonium, let me, like, do heroin with John Cale, and let me record, dark music. And it had the desired effect.
And dark is an understatement, I would say. There's a lot of bands out there who are faux dark. I don't know, bands who are like, I don't know, maybe Nine Inch Nails or Metallica. Uh, they project an image of being dark, and especially Nine Inch Nails, like, oh, this music's really dark. But compared to the real deal, like Nico, I think that stuff is a joke. I think Metallica is a joke, and Nine Inch Nails are a joke. Their music is faux. It's just phony to me. Whereas I don't think there's anything phony about Nico. Um, it is. I can't think of anybody else or anything else that sounds like her records.
No, and if you want to talk about the Velvet Underground having influenced a lot of punk and new wave bands later on, this record I would say was a big influence for Goth. And I'm not the biggest Goth fan. As a matter of fact, I shouldn't even say that. I should say I'm not a Goth fan. Not only am I not the biggest Goth fan, I'm not a Goth fan. Um, and Metallica is not a band that would leap to mind in that sort of way, but
No,
Nine Inch Nails, I could see the connection. I think I liked their first or second record. I had that. Didn't love it, but thought it was okay. And actually, when I was living in New Orleans, the first time I lived there, Trent Reznor lived like a mile down the street from me. And so that was really, I think, the only reason I even like found Nine Inch Nails and even started listening to them. I was like, oh, the guy's my neighbor. It's the least I can do.
so you say you're not a fan of goth. Does that mean you don't like bands like Bauhaus, for example?
Yeah. And yeah, it just doesn't do it for me. There's certain musical genres which I'm like, yeah, it's all right, and like if you were playing it, if you and I are hanging out and you're playing Bauhaus in the background or whatever, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. There's stuff. If you were playing Jimmy Buffett, I'd grab the record off the turntable and chuck it out your window. So like, I don't feel that way, okay, but it's just nothing I would put on.
That was a great tour too, the tour of '82, Jimmy Buffett and Bauhaus.
Yes. That would be. I've seen some strange mixes, but I've never seen that one.
Um, so I hate the label goth.
Yeah.
To me, it just conjures up people dressing up for Halloween and,
Yeah.
like, painting their nails black and wearing dark clothing and dyeing their hair black. Ooh, scary. Ooh, they must be so deep and so dark. That said, I do think Bauhaus, their first handful of records are pretty brilliant. And I don't associate them necessarily. I guess they're labeled goth, but that isn't why I like their records. I just think they're just really interesting musically and great songs. And if they're going to be lumped in with that whole goth thing, I can see why, because of their image and everything. Um, but I think out of all of those bands who would be considered goth, they're the one that stands out for me as like, okay, they're actually a really good band and unique and unusual, and they created something that was their own. You know, their
What
sound was very unique.
what was their most popular album?
Mm,
Because
I
there's
I
one I definitely know.
I wouldn't consider any of them really
Okay.
popular.
There was
I
one that, you know,
Okay, well, there was the first one, In a Flat Field, maybe.
nope,
uh Mask was another one.
nope.
um uh oh God, what's the third one? um
Like I'll know it when I hear the title.
the third one is, oh, The Sky Is Falling.
That one. Yep. That's the one I
um
know.
and around that time they were doing a couple covers that actually I think gave them their closest thing to a hit, at
Mm,
least. Was the cover of Ziggy Stardust,
yeah.
and also a cover of Third Uncle, which was a early Brian Eno song on one of his early records. Uh, I think those, and they were never close to hits on this side of the pond, but in England, I think those were released as singles and probably charted for them. Whereas I don't think any of their original songs did.
Yeah, and so that's the sort of thing where even if it just started there and not here, that would get it on my radar, and that would, like, get me to at least check them out. And that was the thing, is like about like radio airplay, and so they're definitely bands I've listened to and like or don't like both, that I would never have even known they existed if they hadn't had one song that just got enough radio airplay. Like for example, the Dandy Warhols,
Mhm.
okay, who are like so many other bands, okay, and particularly in terms of their popularity and their reach, which was modest, but if it wasn't for The Last Junkie on Earth, their song that got a fair amount of radio airplay, I would never have listened to any of their other stuff. I wouldn't have even known who they were. And now you don't have that. Like it's different. It's sort of interesting.
And they also had, I thought it was another song of theirs, Bohemian Like Me, which was used for a car commercial, I think Volkswagen or something.
Yep.
And I thought that was their only thing that flirted with being a hit, and that put them on the map. So, um, The Last Junkie Hunter, I don't even
Yeah.
think I know that song.
I didn't think you'd be a junkie because doing heroin is so passe.
Mm,
It was, check it out if you have it. It was like, it's super catchy. It's sort of like, and again, it's like there are bands like a certain song by Blur, for example. There's just certain Smash Mouth, where their one song gets radio airplay, and then
Now you're really pushing it,
yeah, no,
pal.
no, and I don't like them. I'm just saying
I
they
know,
they wouldn't
I
get on
know.
my radar otherwise. And there are certain bands which I like wanted to dislike, but liked. And so for example, and I really wanted to dislike them, but I like Dookie. I like that first Green Day album. I don't know if it's their first or not, but I like that album. And I definitely think one of the differences between us, and this is not a stark black and white difference, but I think you like music more and I like songs more. And so I like stuff I can sing along to, and again, not just that, because again, I like a
Sure.
lot of other stuff, and I'm sure that there's also a lot of songs you like that. But again, like I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you I think are more interested in music and in albums, and I'm more interested in singles.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And it goes back to one of our earlier conversations about being able to listen to music that doesn't necessarily have any vocals.
Yeah,
And when you talk about something, I've talked about being really into soundtrack music, and
yeah,
a big part of my listening is jazz, and for the most part, jazz or soundtracks have no vocals whatsoever, and which goes to um, us talking about how lyrics are more important
yeah,
to you
yeah.
than they are to me. And so, yeah, that makes sense.
You've also
Yeah,
talked about how when you put an album on, you listen to the whole album, or
for
at least the
sure.
whole side. You don't take it off. So I'm curious. When we first met, if you recall, when I was working on Hollow Cow, and you came in, and I was playing music, and you said, "Wow, you've heard like two or three songs." And you said, "Wow, did you make this tape?" And I said, "Yeah," because it was one of my many mixtapes. Because I was always making mixtapes. Did you ever make mixtapes?
Did I ever make mixtapes?
The reason I asked that, because that's not listening to a whole album. That's like putting one song on, taping it, then an
Sure.
next.
So, I mean, if we want to go down that rabbit hole,
Yeah,
my mixtapes would since most of my cassettes, and I still have a zillion cassettes, that I would record records onto so that I could take them with me in the car or in a
yeah,
Walkman or whatever. But I would make mixtapes. Like sometimes if I was making a tape for somebody else, um, it would be a mixtape of random tracks from random records. But oftentimes, mixtapes that were made for me were songs that were B-sides, or rare cuts or whatever that weren't on albums. So, for example, say I had like 12 Echo and the Bunnymen singles or 12-inch 45s that had, one or two non-LP songs on each of them, and I would compile all of those into a single tape.
got
So
it.
it's almost like having another record by Echo
Right.
and the Bunnymen.
Right. That's a different approach. Like one of the reasons that I needed to make mixtapes. I mean, I've always made them. I used to make them for parties, used to make them for friends, definitely would give them to girls I was dating or who I wanted to date. They're great love letters.
Yes, yes.
But critically, when I was working out at the gym, if I was on the treadmill, if I didn't have like the music they were going to play, there was crap. You can't believe it. People were trying to work out to like the who did Zombie? The Cranberries,
Cranberries.
yeah. Like
Uh-huh.
people were trying to work out to that, or the Gypsy Kings. I can't work out to that, and so I would make a mixtape of the Clash and the Ramones and X and all, because I wanted going, 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 going. I need my heart, going. And so, and if I, and to keep myself working out, like on the treadmill, for example, even if I was tired, I'd say, okay, one more song. Just do one more song. Just do one more song. Oh, come on. The next song is going to be, Ziggy Stardust or the Bends. Just keep going until you hear that, and
And
so mixtapes have always made it been a critical part of my life, in that way.
and so would you never have tapes that were just full albums? Like one side of the tape was say Give 'em Enough Rope, and the other side of the tape was the first Clash album.
I definitely I had those, but I couldn't work out to those,
Hmm.
because in particular, not every song, like Police and Thieves is a wonderful song. Okay, their cover, the Clash's cover of Police and Thieves. Okay, but you can't work out to it. Even White Man and Hammersmith Palais. Okay, like, great song. Whereas Clampdown, you can work out to Clampdown. Okay. But I did have that stuff in particular. There's a friend of mine, I can't even remember his name, this is so long ago, in San Francisco, who had a ton of discs of stuff I didn't have. And so I borrowed a lot of that and just taped it all. And so and it was cool because it was stuff I'd never heard of. I remember one of them was Brand New Heavies, which is something that probably wouldn't have crossed my radar. But because he had it, and he said, check it out. And I borrowed it, and it was really good. Actually, the first No Doubt album I borrowed from him. And the first No Doubt album is a great album. It really is. Unfortunately, after that, it was all horrible. But the first one is really good. And I saw them open for Farouk Assault at the Fillmore. And back then, Gwen Stefani was fucking cool. Okay, she was great, and they were great. She's horrible now, but yeah.
I thought we had an agreement in place that No Doubt would never be mentioned here.
You listen to the first record. I tell you what, you don't want that first record.
I'd have to hear it to believe it, but
Okay.
I'll take your word for it. But I promise you, I will never listen to it. Just so you know.
You're making a mistake. Okay, the second record is pop garbage, but the first record is funk and like ska. It's a totally different sound. Like if I put it on, you wouldn't know it was No Doubt.
No doubt about it.
Yep. So the
Um,
next time you're here,
that would be a good topic for a future conversation is bands who perhaps put out a good record or two, and then everything after that was just complete garbage. And it sounds like maybe that's one of those
yeah.
bands.
and one I've mentioned to you before, Kings of Leon, where their
Mhm.
first album is terrific, and I saw them
Mm.
3 or 4 times before they came out with the second record. It was terrible. They went Hollywood, just like Liz Phair went Hollywood, and it's too bad because Liz Phair's first 2 or 3 albums are really great albums, and then she went total Hollywood. Um,
It's interesting that a band like No Doubt or Kings of Leon, I would never ever give them, a chance simply because I would only be familiar with them after they had achieved mainstream success,
right.
which right there, then and there, that means I pretty much dismiss them, whether or not that's fair. That's just
It,
how it works.
yeah, no,
It's like, oh, they're obviously lame.
yeah.
So they couldn't, there's no way they could have ever put out anything that I would have been interested in. But that's probably also a mistake in some cases too.
Yeah, I'll need to be the champion for those for those bands that's happened to. And you can also see it when a band tries to do it, it doesn't work, and then they go back smartly to what they were doing before. For example, if you listen to the production on X's album Ain't Life Grand,
Hmm.
they were obviously swinging for the fences. They were like, let's sell a lot of fucking records because it's such it's like Bob Clearmountain on Born in the USA. It's really like it's echo and bass and drum and all, and it's like, fuck, this is not X. What is this? And the songs aren't bad. It's not that. It's the production. And you can tell again that there was like, we need a hit. And I get it. Like, it's easier for me to sit here. It's like a ton of Clash fans all said the Clash sold out when they went and made an album. Like, it's easy to be virtuous about someone else's career,
It
but
is.
but
It
but
is.
it's still a shame at times. So
And when you're in a band who is on the cusp of some serious mainstream success and you've been grinding away in the trenches for say 10 years like a band like X, it's hard to fault them
yeah,
for trying to make something that perhaps is a little more commercial and has a chance to sell a few more records and therefore allow them to make some money.
yeah,
Um, but as a music fan, it's also hard to forgive them because typically what comes with that move is really shitty records.
yeah, eh,
And we could go on and on listing records from bands that we adored until they did that.
yeah. And again, it's easier for me as a fan to say, "Oh, they fucking sold out. I hate them. I'll never listen to them again. They're dead to me." But if I was in the band, and rent's due, or I get a baby on the way, or
Hmm.
whatever, my view would probably be different. you know
Yeah.
and but you don't do that when you're a music fan. You don't. I think most people don't. You don't give them that break. It's same thing with acting, where you're like, oh, fuck, he made that movie. That guy, he was so fucking cool. like you
Like
know
like every single thing Robert De Niro ever did after, say, Goodfellas.
yeah, it's like, let me just mail it in and get a check. But it's it's more like when there's like a character actor, like let's say Philip Seymour Hoffman had decided to just really sell out and do Meet the Parents type movies. Like, you'd be like, oh my god, what happened to him? Like, he was, someone like that. De Niro's made 1,000 movies, so like it doesn't even phase me. It just, but if it was someone I really liked and admired as an actor, you know
Well, the reason I use De Niro is because pretty much every movie he made up until that point was a great movie for the most part.
mm,
And then every movie he made after that was an awful movie, like just a mainstream schlocky shitfest. And so that's why I use him as the classic example for that sort of thing. Because there was a while there he'd be in 4 or 5 movies a year, like Meet the Parents, that kind of crap, and just one after another was just an awful, awful piece of garbage. And so, as a big fan of his classic movies, it's somewhat hard to watch. And like you were saying, there's a lot of parallels between that and what bands do.
yeah. And there's probably other avenues where people do it as well, but again, it's hard to, like, you can't be all. I mean, at the one time it does irritate me and piss me off. At the other hand, it's hard to be preachy about someone else's life. It's a tricky thing.
It
Yeah.
is. It is. So circling back
Yeah.
to the goth thing, what are some other bands that you would even consider goth?
That's what I'm trying to think. And to be fair, it definitely partly it's the image. Um,
It seems like it all stems from the image more than anything,
you
but
know,
like The Cure to me are
yeah,
another one of those bands that they were probably the most successful, and I use it in quotes, goth band. And to your point, it is all about the image because especially their later records, there's nothing goth sounding about them. They're pretty much straightforward pop records.
it's funny you're saying the later records. I think the first record, Killing an Arab, was that the first record?
Boys Don't Cry.
Oh, Boys Don't Cry. And then
Killing an Arab was on it.
was
Yeah.
on it. Yeah. So Boys Don't
Yeah.
Cry.
Yeah. I
And
know
Boys
which
Don't
one.
Cry was the hit single off of it.
Yeah.
That's not goth. And I saw them on that tour and they were great. And they were not goth. Like, and then suddenly Robert Smith, just, changed his look and all. And, and there's at a certain point, the look is like, all right, it's just not for me. Whereas I will say in other bands, I like crazy looks, like the Cramps. I love the way they look. Obviously not goth, a very different. Hard to even categorize what the Cramps are, but they're fantastic.
Maybe
Yeah,
a cross between goth and rockabilly
yeah, and
would be the
surf punk,
Cramps.
like they do all sorts of stuff. I love the Cramps. I think they're one of the most underrated bands ever, and I saw them
I
too.
like
They
them
were
too.
they were great live. Um, but
Around what year did you see them? The 80s sometime?
yeah, but later, like it was definitely like they'd been around for a while by the time I saw them.
Do you remember their performance in that movie Erg, A Music War?
Yes, yes,
So was the whole show somewhat like that
somewhat. Yeah,
performance?
yep.
Yeah, because that's
Um,
pretty wild.
yeah, no, and they were definitely wild. Lux Interior, that's such a great
Yes.
stage name. That was your problem, Barry, is you never had a cool stage name. See,
Oh,
that's what held you back.
yeah,
Rat Scabies,
yeah. Clearly, that's what held me back.
Captain Sensible.
Um, okay, another recent record.
Yep,
Switching gears here. Can you see that?
yep. And I will say Frank Zappa is probably the most well-known artist I know the least.
Hmm.
I really I've listened to the occasional song here or there, but and listened to the first or second Mother's Invention album. I've heard that whole album. Other than that, I really don't know. And except for his novelty hits, like Valley Girl or something stupid like that. But otherwise, I don't know Zappa that well, or hardly
Yeah.
at all, I should say.
Well, he's got a pretty vast catalog,
Yeah,
and you could do deep dives into just different eras of his catalog. This one happens to be, I think, from 1970, 72. Um, it's called Waka Jawaka, and this was during that period where he was putting out records that I guess you would, again, using a label, would be considered fusion records. Um, like a lot of Zappa records. One of the things I appreciate about Zappa, which actually turns off a lot of people, is that he had such a technical proficiency, and everybody he played with were the best rock musicians around, or even jazz musicians would play on some of his jazz-oriented fusion records. This being one of them, like the drummer, his name's Ainsley Dunbar,
oh
and
yeah,
he was a session drummer who
yep.
played on a lot of records that we like a lot, and in particular, a lot of these Zappa records from the late '60s, early '70s. And this is mainly instrumental. There's a couple tunes with vocals on it, but I don't have many friends who like Zappa at all. In fact, most of them poo-poo on Zappa, and I think that's somewhat unfair because he's put out a lot of great music. It's yeah, it's certain like a lot of great music. It's not for everybody, um, and I think a lot of people are turned off by his somewhat misogynistic humor, especially from those records in the early '70s. But I can get by that. I can get past that and appreciate him for just the amazing musician that he was and the amazing musicians he played with. It does
Do
a
you
lot for me.
You were a huge Howard Stern fan. Misogyny should not bother you in the least.
Yeah, that's true. It yeah, it doesn't. I can find humor in it.
Yeah,
It doesn't, and that doesn't necessarily make one misogynistic, but
doesn't help though.
yeah.
Uh, but I wouldn't poo-poo Frank Zappa because I don't know his music well enough to do that, and that's not fair. You know,
And knowing your tastes as well as I do, I wouldn't think you would like this record. Um, but give it a listen. They have the companion record to this is called Hot Rats, which was his uh, probably the first straight up fusion rock, jazz rock record that he did, and that's generally regarded as a high point for him in that genre of music. But listen to that or listen to this, and I'd be curious to see if you get any enjoyment out of it. I certainly do.
I will check it out. Once fusion's another one, which I hear that word. I hear it at restaurants. I hear it in music. I'm like,
You're out the door.
yeah. And so the funny thing is, like, I'm a huge Miles Davis fan, not a fan of Bitches Brew. Okay, which is maybe his most famous album ever. It's certainly top three. And whereas I love Blow by Blow by Jeff Beck.
Well,
And
then you might like
and,
something like this.
and so I won't rule it out. Okay, and if someone said to me, "Listen, you got to hear Jimmy Buffett's first album. It's very different than everything he ever did." I'm like, "Okay, I'll check it out." But until someone says that, I'm not listening to it.
That's I think that's a good thing to be open-minded about giving different genres or different acts a chance. Um, and we've talked about this in the past, and a lot of the things that has opened my mind and opened my ears to a lot of music that's new to me recently is just being more receptive and more open-minded. Like, for example, um, and I think we've talked about it in the past, but I wouldn't have been caught dead listening to the Bee Gees in, say, 11th grade when the only records I was listening to was like Gang of Four and Psychedelic Furs and the Sex Pistols and Devo. But now I have to say the Bee Gees are probably in my top 10 of all-time favorite bands.
Wow.
Maybe top 20, but certainly maybe top 10. Their run of records from the late 60s through the whole disco era, man, there's not many pop records better than those records, and just one after another. They were just such craftsmen and could just write the most memorable pop hooks and play them well, sing them well. And I just think the world of the Bee Gees now as an old man.
And I'm a big Bee Gees fan as well. It's funny you talk about the craft aspect of it because you talk about Zappa getting blowback. The Bee Gees got blowback for that, and the biggest example of that is Steely Dan got blowback for being so perfect, such perfect craftsmen. I like it. But it's so funny where people are dismissive of that, of like, that's not music. Like, in particular, the whole punk, attitude of, that's not music. Like, but for me, I like it. And I definitely like the Bee Gees a lot. And,
So,
and,
so
oh, good.
have you seen that documentary on HBO, the
How
2 hour
can you
Bee
mend a
Gees?
broken heart? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really good. And I wanted to also mention before we move on to something else, there's a great recent Frank Zappa documentary. It's called, crazily enough, it's called Zappa. Um, Also worth checking out, especially for the uninitiated to the Zappa world. Um, I think it might be a good starter point in that it really digs into why he was so unique and such a genius in my opinion
All
anyway,
right, cool.
and clearly the opinion of the person who made the movie, who happens to be um, the other guy from those Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure movies,
Okay.
not the Keanu Reeves. It's
Right.
the other guy who starred in it. So either Bill or Ted.
Yeah.
I've never seen any of them, but it's the whoever isn't Keanu Reeves. I
Okay.
think his
Yeah.
name is Alex Winter. In fact, he's the one who directed and put together that Zappa doc.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, kind of
Yeah, I'll
strange.
check it out. As a matter of fact, you can go to a website called justwatch.com and put in the name of a movie, and it'll tell you what platforms you can stream that movie on. So that's
I
where I'll
only
be
use
going.
it about 40 times a day.
So there you go.
And
Uh,
that is such a useful tool,
yeah,
man.
it's great.
There's so much useless shit out there on the internet. That one is certainly not one of them. That
It,
is just so useful.
it lists all the platforms, whether you can rent it or see it for free or whatever. I love that. So,
Hmm.
so when you're talking about being more receptive at an older age to music, also for me, it was one of the things of meeting Kim, because she, as we've discussed before, had huge collection as well of music, was definitely as into music as I am, and yet different bands. And so a band that never would have crossed my radar was Magnetic Fields.
Hmm.
She turned me on to. I love them.
Hmm.
She and I have seen him a couple of times. She's actually probably going to come back in October because they're doing a tour for their album from like 25 years ago, 69 love songs, and so they're doing like 2 nights in a row where they're playing the whole album,
Hmm.
and we're going to go see that. But like there's one, Tinder Sticks, who we've mentioned before. I probably wouldn't have known them. Um, Definitely a lot of stuff where because it was her, I was like, all right, I gotta listen to this. And that was great. And Yola Tango was another one.
Hmm.
And so it's so perfect to meet someone who not only is into music as you are, but other stuff that you don't know.
And it must have, it must go without saying that you had enough faith in her taste that if she recommended it, then that would be a green light for you, in the sense that, say, somebody who has awful taste and likes like Tom Cruise movies or something like
Yep.
that, you're not going to be as prone to take their suggestion and run with it. But that must have really helped, the fact that she had good taste.
Yep, and yet we don't certainly didn't agree on everything, just like you and I don't
Sure.
agree on everything. I love surf rock. She was never a surf rock fan. That's fun. When I played the Beach Boys, I played them when she wasn't around. And there were just certain though ones we had that like I couldn't play and she couldn't play, like out and out. So like for example, she hates Billy Joel, which is fine with me because I hate Billy Joel as well. So that was never a problem. But as you know, I despise Rush, and she is a big Rush fan.
Oh,
It's just like
oh,
I was like,
wow.
no playing Rush when I'm around. So and it's funny. One time we saw Ted Leo, and he did a Rush cover, and everyone was going crazy. And I was like looking at Kim, like, why are they going crazy? It's like it's a Rush song. I'm like, oh, okay,
So I'm a big Rush fan.
as I know, yeah.
Um, not as big as some people in my life, but what don't you like about Rush?
Geddy Lee's voice for one thing. I can't stand it, and that's the thing. And that's like with Pearl Jam. I don't like Eddie Vedder's voice. Okay, and if you don't like the singer's voice, it's going to be hard. Even if you like everything else, it's pretty hard to
Hmm.
get past that. And that's
Yeah.
that's why, like for example, I like Luna so much. I love Dean Wareham's voice. It just totally does it for me. I love Brian Ferry's voice. And there's certain music where the voice isn't the main focus for me. But if I actively don't like the voice,
Pretty
that's
hard to get over that.
yeah. I
I,
can't think of one band where I'm like I like everything but the singer's voice. I mean,
yeah, that's interesting. Why you've mentioned it. I've tried to conjure up somebody like that, and I don't think it's possible
I,
to like a band or an artist if you don't like the singer's voice.
it'd be even harder with an actor. It'd be easier with an actor, but it would still be difficult. But like every time they open their mouth, you're like wincing, you know. And there are bands I've liked. Ockerville River. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but
Hmm.
Will Sheff, the lead singer, I like the band just because I love his voice.
Hmm.
And so it can go the other way where I like the singer's voice so much that even though the songs, I like the voice so much. But yeah, if I don't like the voice, it's just dead in the water. Um, and I'm trying to think of other bands you like, I don't like, and that's probably going to be the main reason. Not necessarily, but probably.
So I ran with your recommendation of the old 97s and satellite rides.
Yep.
I wasn't able to find it on record. I don't think it was ever released on record, but I
It
ordered it
was
on
because
CD.
that's how I originally bought it, but it just
Oh,
maybe
really?
out of print. Yep. So
Yeah, that's that era where there was these limited little runs of
yeah.
of records. But anyway, I ordered a CD, and hopefully it'll show up in a couple days, and
Oh,
I'll give it a listen and
uh,
let you know what I think about it.
I look forward to that very much. I'm curious. And that's also the nice thing about our relationship, which is if you don't like it, that's fine, you know? And obviously I want you to be honest, just like, I'm honest with you, except for the bands you've played in. They're all great.
Not even I would say that. um, Go ahead.
Yeah, that
You're
mu-
gonna have another snappy retort.
it must be tough when you're playing in a band where you're doing music you don't really like.
Um, yeah,
I, Tom
th-
Petty.
I don't think I have ever played in a band where it was that black and white, where the music, I just didn't like the music. There would be occasional songs that I didn't like, but I wouldn't have stayed in the band if there wasn't something I liked about the music
I
in
was just
general.
I was just reading that Tom Petty, when he did Full Moon Fever, he wanted to do a different album than the Heartbreakers type stuff. He wanted to do a solo record that had a different sort of sound, and he's hooking up with Jeff Lynne to do that. And only one of the Heartbreakers was willing to even play on the record. The others all said it's a terrible idea. The songs are terrible. You're making a huge mistake.
Yeah. And history obviously proved them wrong,
I
because
think
that
that may
was
be his
his
best selling
biggest.
album. Yeah,
Yeah, that record was huge and had, I think, about three or four singles that were just huge. Like,
yeah.
and when that came out, I think it was '89 or so. Tom Petty was never bigger than
And
that record.
and the record company tried to dissuade him from doing it. As a matter of fact, he said the only reason the album got made is because the record company changed management.
Huh?
He said the original management was no, and,
Wow.
and he was determined. He felt it was good, and that's so interesting because one thing if the record did okay or whatever, but it was mammoth.
It
It's hard
was.
to believe
And
that.
actually, it didn't sound that much different than all the Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers records,
not
really.
not to the point where some of the guys in the Heartbreakers would say, "I'm not playing on that." I mean, like, what
Mm.
would make them feel that strongly?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the original demos